Good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning. Woo! And all God's people said, brrr. It's cold out here. All right, well, we're ready to get going. Good to see you here on this chilly January morning. Lots going on at Bellevue Heights. You may have noticed behind these walls here is our office, okay? And so that's where we are. They've cleared out the old office area, and the general contractor here this morning, I said, so I'll be done in about 3 weeks, right? He didn't give me a Christian look, okay? And so I'm all ready. Everything in all of our offices are behind this partition right here. And it was once organized neatly, but now every time we go look for something, it's just all in shambles there. So hopefully we're going to survive. It's just, you realize how spoiled you are, but be patient with the office people in there. We've got Dave and Randy and I, working out of the office, working here. They got me a little cubby hole set up, but it's just it's different. It's different trying to find things. We may be in the library, and you may be meeting in different places. So just the next more than 3 weeks, he said, is going to be. We have to be flexible, but prayerfully, hopefully, it'll all turn out well. Okay, so I'm ready for football season to be over. My wife, two questions. Well, first of all, I'm wearing a Michigan shirt because Michigan won the national championship. A couple Washington people have cursed me as I've come in today, but I was prepared either way. Now, how many Ohio State people do we have here? Okay, I really want to know. Ohio State people, you're Big Ten. Did you want Michigan to win or lose? That's what I don't get. That's right. The true Ohio State people weren't for Michigan, I don't think, right there. But I've got a whole closet full of shirts, and my wife says, Rob, you're shameless when you beg for them, and I'm not buying you anymore. So the shirt thing is over. College is over, and the Saints are out of the playoffs. So we'll see how far. I only think I have a Chiefs shirt left. So if they don't go all the way, we're in trouble. All right. So we're ready to go. Good to see you. And today we're on lesson number 70, page 75, lesson 13. Page 75, lesson 13. A couple of things I want to say up front. Let's see. I was going to answer a question. Someone came up to me. I just want to be a little transparent with you here. Sometimes you come up and ask questions, and a lot of times people, you say, save a lot of time for questions. And sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Be honest with you, the one reason I don't do all the questions is because sometimes when I answer off the cuff, I haven't prepared. I may not speak correctly. And so someone brought it to my attention last week. When I was talking about the kings, you remember King David, King Solomon, and then the divided kingdom. And I got a whole list of the kings. His son Rehoboam was the king of the southern kingdom. Rehoboam was the son of Solomon through Naamah, and he was the last king of the united kingdom and the first king of the divided kingdom of the southern kingdom. But you may remember the first king of the northern kingdom was Jeroboam. And I may have said that Jeroboam was Solomon's son. He was not. Jeroboam was an Ephraimite. He was, and Solomon saw him and put him in charge of the labor and in charge of the taxes. And he rose up high. And one day a prophet came to Jeroboam and tore his clothing. Do you remember that? And 12 trips of clothing, and said the kingdom is going to be divided, and you'll be king over some of these. But he got so popular that Solomon sought to kill him, and he had to flee to Egypt. And he stayed there until Solomon's death. And when Solomon died and Rehoboam became king, he wanted to come back. So he came back, and when he came back, all his buddies came with him, and they went to Rehoboam and said, hey, we're back, we want to serve you, but these are the things we want to address. And Rehoboam, instead of taking the counsel of the wise men who said, hey, if you answer them nicely, you'll have a united kingdom, and you can everything they'll be for you. His buddies said, no, you tell them we're going to be harder on you than Solomon was. And when he did that, that was the beginning of the divided kingdom. So you got Rehoboam and Jeroboam, but they weren't both the sons of Solomon. And so I want to, if I said that, I'm sorry, but I say that very quickly because That's probably one of 35 things I've said, okay? So I always say, don't listen to Rob. When you hear something, you question it. You go to the Bible. I'm not the authority. I've got a strong responsibility to teach the Bible, so I take that seriously. But that's why I tell people, don't listen to the messenger, listen to the message, and make sure it agrees with the Bible. So that's why I want you to study the Bible on your own. All right, now let's go back to Nehemiah. The book of Nehemiah, some people say, could be the continuation of the book of Ezra. It's probably one of the more popular books in the Bible because it's a positive book. It describes the rebuilding of the wall of Jerusalem. Now, in 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, invaded Jerusalem, conquered the city, tore down the wall, tore down the temple, took most of the people captive. And down into Babylon. The most notable captives was the king Jehoiachin, otherwise known as Jeconiah, and he was taken down captive. And most of them lived in subservient conditions as captives, but a few had a pretty good life. Remember Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego? Nebuchadnezzar looked at the brightest of the bright and he put them in the king's service, put them through a training program where they ate the king's food and went to the king's school and they learned and they became advisors to the king. He was smart enough to know these Jewish people were smart people. I can use them and benefit from them. Now, Nebuchadnezzar died in 562, and the kingdom started weakening. We're going to read all about this when we do Daniel. But eventually it was overtaken by Persia and King Cyrus. Now, in King Cyrus, in about 540 BC, for some reason, he's decided he was going to allow the Israelites to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. Now, some people say that he had read some of the book of the law. It could have been that he had heard of Esther and talk about it being favorable to the Jews. It could have been his advisors told him about the temple. But for whatever reason, he assigned a guy named Zerubbabel to lead a group of people to go to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple. Zerubbabel took 50,000 people with him. And Zerubbabel was the leader both by appointment and by inheritance. By appointment was the king, Cyrus appointed him. You're the leader. I'm giving you the papers. I'm giving you the credentials. I'm giving you the letters. You go. But he was also the grandson of one of the last kings of the southern kingdom, Jehoiachin or Jeconiah, who was an evil king whom Nebuchadnezzar took captive down into Babylon. And remember, Jeremiah put the curse of Jeconiah and said, because of your evil leadership, your descendants will not sit on the throne. So even though Zerubbabel was the leader, he was not the king. He didn't sit on the throne. So he goes back there, and they rebuild the temple. It wasn't nearly as big as Solomon's temple, but that's what he did. And that's described in the book of Ezra. Ezra comes back later and starts doing the spiritual reforms back in there. And then that's about 60 years after this. So Ezra, even though the book of Ezra started 60 years before Nehemiah, Ezra went there to get spiritual reforms there. And now we're going to see the third trip to Jerusalem, and that's going to be led by Nehemiah. Trip number 1 was Zerubbabel. Return number 2 was Ezra, and return number 3 would be Nehemiah. This is about 445 BC, and Nehemiah will go with the task to rebuild the wall because they needed protection from their enemies, lest everything that happened to them before would happen all over again. So who was Nehemiah? He was an Israelite who lived in Babylon. But he had moved up the ranks in the king's court. He got a promotion after promotion after promotion. If you saw his business card, it would say, Nehemiah, cupbearer to the king. Now, that's good, and that's not so good, depending on the taste of the wine, okay? So the cupbearer was a good job because he was in the presence of the king. It was a good job because he ate meals with the king. He sat at the king's table. It was a good job because he was a trusted advisor of the king. In these days, kings had to be very careful of what they drank or what they ate because poison was a very popular way to kill kings and to overthrow the kingdom. And so you can imagine every time they sat down for dinner, everybody's going like this, and Nehemiah's okay. He's got to drink it first before he gives it to the king. So the king loved Nehemiah because he was risking his life at every meal. So they had a good relationship and a good rapport, but it was also he was always risking his life at every meal that they took place. In this book, we're going to see how God will use this man named Nehemiah to be instrumental in rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem. Look over at the top of page 75. I'm going to read the second paragraph. God would use a man named Nehemiah to accomplish rebuilding the wall. Nehemiah had been the cupbearer of the king, and one day when he hears of the sad condition of the people in Jerusalem, he became distressed. For 4 months, he grieved and prayed for his people. When the king noticed Nehemiah's sadness, he listened to Nehemiah's story and eventually allowed Nehemiah to return to Jerusalem to rebuild the wall. Key people are going to be Nehemiah. He's the cupbearer to King Artaxerxes, who led the third group of exiles back to Jerusalem. Ezra, remember I told you last week, Ezra was both the priest and the scribe. The priest that he ministered to the people, the scribe that he studied the law and he knew the law of God. So he was well versed in the Bible, scribe. He cared for people. He was the priest. Sanballat was the governor of Samaria, who attempted to discourage Nehemiah and the people from rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem. And then Tobiah, the Ammonite leader who mocked the rebuilding of the wall and discouraged the people. Now remember those two names, Sanballat and especially Tobiah. Friends, if you could name people, you probably would have a Sanballat and a Tobiah in your life that you would name them right now. They're always making false accusations. They're always trying to slander you. They're always trying to discourage you. They're always saying false things to you, trying to prevent you from doing what God calls you to do. There's Sanballats and Tobiahs everywhere. And we need to identify them for who they are and respond to them as Nehemiah responded to them. All right? Key themes. The first one is vision. Although the Jews completed the temple in 515 BC, the city walls remained in shambles. These walls were vital to protect the people from their enemies. In Bible times, the city walls were symbols of power, protection, and beauty. God put the desire to rebuild walls in Nehemiah's heart, which gave him a vision to go to Jerusalem and rebuild the walls. The book of Nehemiah, possibly on par with most any other book in the Bible, is used in business models for leadership and visionary seminars more than anything else. Because Nehemiah is a great example of a great leader, of a visionary leader. Proverbs 29:18 says, where there is no vision, the people perish. And so you need people with vision. Some people have vision. Some people do not have vision. I believe when you look back, you thank God for the visionaries in the world who had the faith and the courage to step out against the grain, against all odds, against public opinion, and shared their vision with the people. But it's hard. It's hard. I shared with you last week the truth that I heard. They told our pastors, if you're a pastor who sees the future with your people, you're a leader. If you're a pastor who's one step ahead of your people in seeing the future, you're a visionary leader. If you're a pastor, you're 2 or 3 steps ahead, you get fired, okay? And so there's that tension. The great visionary leaders want to lead the people, but you got to lead them in such a way that they follow. Someone once also said, he who leads and no one follows is only taking a walk. And so that's the way to see if you're a good leader or not, is anyone following you? Is anyone following you? And so, but leaders, there's nothing spiritual about being a leader. There's good leaders and there's bad leaders. Am I right? You've got some leaders people are following them into evil and do things, but it's some of it's personality, some of it's oratory skills. But Nehemiah was a godly leader, and he did that right there. So, And just let me say this. As your pastor, I pray for God's wisdom. I pray for God's wisdom. I want to be that leader who's just a little bit of seeing the future, but I don't want to get ahead of the people. And I want to lead. I want to hear God and respond to God. But I want a collection of people. I want to get input because I want us to move. And as we move forward into the future, we've got so many new people in our church. And the good is that all the seats are being filled. The bad is, man, you folks come from so many different backgrounds. And if I hear one more time, well, let me tell you how we did it in our church, you know. And so everybody has a way they did it. And friends, we can't do it 45 different ways here, you know. So as we come together, we all have to compromise a little bit and get on the same page as we move forward. So that's the difficulty of what I call a community church. Is that we come from so many different backgrounds. And so that's why I emphasize more than anything else the Bible. I'm not here to hear how the Methodists or the Presbyterians or the Baptists, you know, the Church of God did it. Let's see what the Bible says about it. And that's where we're going to move forward. And that's going to be our common bond is the Bible right here. Okay, so the second theme is prayer. When faced with obstacles, Nehemiah always responded in prayer. He sought God's wisdom and guidance and bathed the project in prayer from the very beginning. As Christians today, we can learn much about prayer from looking at the prayers of Nehemiah. We're going to look at one of his prayers today. And I haven't done it here. I did it in my previous church. I've got a book. It's back there somewhere. And it's called Praying the Bible. Praying the Bible, where I did about 60 different prayers in the Bible as a 60-day devotional. And I even did a 6-week series on prayer using the prayers of the Bible. If you ever feel inadequate in prayer, pray the Bible. You can't go wrong when you pray the Word of God. And so once we get out of here, I'll be happy to print more of those. But it's just the prayers. And Nehemiah, about a prayer of Nehemiah is in there. And just shows you, whether you pray it word for word or you use that as an outline for your prayers. But Nehemiah had a beautiful prayer we'll look at later. The third theme would be leadership. Nehemiah was a godly leader in every sense of the word. He used careful planning, teamwork, problem solving, and courage to accomplish this momentous task. He had great faith, but also the work ethic that was needed to provide good leadership. The life of Nehemiah contains many valuable lessons about leadership and vision. And I shared with someone this morning, with one of our ministry teams, that she was how she demonstrated great leadership because she was showing that she cared for the people. And two things that I want to do as a pastor when I lead people. Number one, I want to work harder. I want them to know I'm working just as hard or harder than they are. You know, I don't want to be the leader that sits on the sidelines while other people do the work. I want my work ethic to be far above everybody else, and I want them to know I care about them. That's what Nehemiah did. He worked hard and he cared for the people. That's two great things of a leader. And the next one would be problems. After the work began, Nehemiah faced many problems and obstacles. His enemies threatened him and instilled fear into his workers. His people were discouraged and did not want to continue their work. Yet through it all, Nehemiah kept moving forward with his eye on the goal and did not let problems prevent him from finishing the work. And I'm going to get into this later. That's the story of Nehemiah. You ever heard the 3 steps forward, 2 steps back? Have you ever started something and you never finished it because of a problem, because of an obstacle, because of a criticism, because of a complaint? Anything worth doing in life, you're going to encounter problems. The Christian way is not the easy way. It's uphill both ways, barefooted in the snow. You know, it's hard. It's hard, okay? And what we're going to learn from Nehemiah is that when you encounter problems, don't quit. You may slow down. You may rest. You may get counsel and advice, but don't let the devil win that easy. I used to. Back in the olden days, but when I was skinny and when I didn't have a hip replacement, I used to run a lot. I've run 2 marathons, and when I run, and whether it's a 10-mile or 10K or 15K or even a marathon, I'm not the fastest runner, but I never stopped. And if you ever run a marathon, they say the 20-mile mark is the killer. And then it goes, those last 6 miles are the worst. And people would always stop and get water and drink. I wouldn't stop, because if I stopped, what? It was so much harder to start again. So it is in the Christian life. Don't stop. Keep moving. And Nehemiah is a great example. He kept his eyes fixed on the goal, and he didn't let his enemies get him from off track, and keep going right there. And then revival. Although God enabled them to rebuild the wall, the work was not complete until the people rebuilt their lives spiritually. Ezra, who served as priest, instructed the people how to live according to the laws of God. As they listened to Ezra, they recognized the sin in their lives, repented of their sin, and turned back to serving the one true God. All right. So the key verse, I think, is Nehemiah 6:15 and 16. So the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month, Elul, in 52 days. And when all our enemies heard of it, all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem, for they perceived that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. You see that all throughout the Bible. When the enemies believed that God was with Israel, they were afraid. When they knew that God wasn't with them, they weren't afraid at all. And so when you know God's with you, all things are possible. So I want to live in the power of God, and I want people to see God in me, to know that I walk with God. So the enemy said that something different about those people at Bellevue Heights. They walk with God. God's with them. God's with them. So let's look at the outline. Number 1, chapters 1 through 7. Rebuilding the wall. As cupbearer to the king, Nehemiah was one of the more privileged Jews in the Persian Empire. He had an envied position and was completely trusted by the king. Even more, he was in the king's presence at all times and was well aware of all the happenings in the greater Medo-Persian Empire. Read Nehemiah 1 through 4, and answer the following. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. Now it happened in the month of Chislev in the 20th year, as I was in Susa, the citadel, that Hananiah, one of my brothers, came with certain men from Judah. And I asked them concerning the Jews who escaped, who had survived the exile, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the remnant there in the province who had survived the exile is in great trouble and shame. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates are destroyed by fire. As soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. And I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. I'm going to stop there. So who wrote Nehemiah? Well, the word says the words of Nehemiah. So I would say Nehemiah, probably with the help of Ezra the scribe. Nehemiah and Ezra probably together. How did Nehemiah learn of the situation in Judah? One of his brothers, named Hananiah, came from Jerusalem, and just in a casual conversation, he said, well, how's it going in Jerusalem? You ever asked somebody how they were doing, and they told you how they were doing? They haven't learned our custom. I didn't really mean, how are you doing? I was just trying to be friendly there, you know. And so someone came up to me. He's not here today, and he's a pastor. I said, how you doing? He said, well, you asked, Pastor. Don't ask it unless you're ready. And I mean it. So Hananiah told him how bad it was in Jerusalem. The walls were torn down and destroyed by fire. The people lay in ruins. So that's that. He gave him a report. And how did Nehemiah respond to the news about Judah? He wept and prayed and fasted for days. He cried. His heart was broken, because he loved Jerusalem. He loved, I do that. I go sometimes, every time I go back to Mississippi, I'm from there, but boy, it's just, I just feel sorry for my hometown. It's just in shambles, it seems like. It's going to pot, and just the roads are a mess. They've got boil water alert in there, and so it's just, you hurt because you care about people like that. And I think that's what Nehemiah felt about Jerusalem right there. So Nehemiah wept and prayed for days and fasted before the Lord. This prayer of Nehemiah is a great example, okay? There's a prayer. I'm going to read verses 5 through 11. Nehemiah 1. Listen to his prayer. O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments, let your ear be attentive and your eyes be open to hear the prayer of your servant that I now pray before you day and night for the people of Israel, your servants, confessing the sins of the people against Israel, confessing the sins of the people of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Even I and my father's house have sinned. We have acted very corruptly against you and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, and the rules that you commanded your servant Moses. Remember the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the peoples. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though you are outcasts or in your uttermost parts of the heaven, from there I will gather them and bring them to the place that I have chosen to make my name dwell there. I'm going to stop there for a second. I'm going to go through verse 11. They are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by your great power and by your strong hand, O Lord. Let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight to fear your name, and give success to your servant today, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. Now, that was the prayer of Nehemiah. And to answer the questions, in verse 5, he praised God. He acknowledged that God is the creator of the universe. He praised God. He started his prayer by praising God. In verses 6, the second thing he did, he confessed his sins and the sins of the people. First, he praised God. Second, he confessed his sins. In verses 8 through 11, he laid his request before God. He laid his request before God. And I want to go on record to say, that's a great model for prayer. If you want to get an ABC in prayer, begin by praising God. Second, confess your sins to God. And third, lay your request before God. That's a great model for prayer. And many of you have heard, I grew up for the last 50 years, and my model of prayer, learned this in high school and college, is the word acts. Have you ever heard that one? A-C-T-S, acts. A is for adoration. C is for confession. T is for thanksgiving. S is for supplication. Supplication means request. So when I pray, I begin by praising God. Then I go by confessing my sins to God. Then I thank God. Thanksgiving is different than praise. Praising God, you praise God for who he is. Jehovah, Lord, Yahweh, King, Lord, Master, Ruler, and Creator. You thank God for what he's done, for your blessings. I thank you, Lord, for my wife, for my children. Thank you for my health. Thank you for my job. Thank you for my, for all these things. You go that. So acts, adoration. A, adoration. C, confession. T, S, supplication. Supplication means request. It's first for others and then for you. That's. I still do that today when I pray. That's the model that I follow. All right? Nehemiah prayed for God to open a door for him to use his position as cupbearer to the king to perhaps help his people. Soon after, when the king detected the gloom of Nehemiah, what did he do according to Nehemiah 2, 2 through 8? I'm going to read 2, 2 through 8. And the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing that you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart. Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? And the king said, what are you requesting? So I prayed to the king. You ever prayed right before you speak? So I prayed to God of heaven, and then I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it. The king said to me, with the queen sitting beside him, how long will you be gone, and when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to the governors of the provinces beyond the river, that they let me pass through until I come to Judah. A letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, to help me get beams. And he goes on. And then it says, and the king granted me whatever I asked, for the hand of God was upon me. So what happens in Nehemiah 2, he asked the king for permission to leave his job as cupbearer and return to Judah. Now, this was a big, bold request, because that would mean the king trusted Nehemiah, and so now he'd have to drink his wine or get another cupbearer right there. So that, once you get a cupbearer, you're like a cupbearer for life. But secondly, that's a true statement, to life or death. But secondly, he also knew that it was like he was complaining about his job. He wanted another job or something like that. So that's it's very important that he goes right there. With permission and blessing of King Artaxerxes, Nehemiah returned to Jerusalem. Giving up a comfortable and wealthy position in Persia, he returned to his suffering homeland and rallied the people to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem right there. Two things I want to jump out right there. First is the king was very receptive to Nehemiah. The biblical answer to that is that God had prepared his heart. God had prepared his heart. As I was reading someone said that if you think about it's for some reason in the Bible it says the queen was there. The queen was there. And if you know, probably the queen or the grandmother or the stepmother of the king, Esther wasn't far removed from there. Are you with me? Remember Esther? We're going to look at the book of Esther next time right there. And so it could easily be that through the life of Esther and Mordecai, the kings was very familiar with the Jews and the Israelites right there. They weren't just known as this, stench of a people right there. So that's one thought of it right there, that Esther had an influence on there. But when even more people say, a lot of people would say, now that they're in Babylon, been in Babylon for 70 years, would you even want to go back? Lisa, I told her about the things in Mississippi. She said, do you want to go back? I said, no. No, I like it here, And it could be that Nehemiah had a good deal in Persia. Why would he leave the king's table? Why would he leave the comfortable lifestyle? Why would he leave the good life and to go back to this dilapidated, destroyed area that's been broken down in ruins and risk his life in hard labor, I'm not anything like Nehemiah, but I do remember when I made the decision to leave my job with a CPA firm and become a pastor. Some people thought it was a crazy thing. Why would you leave this career to go become a pastor that you have no idea where it's going to lead you, money-wise or things like that? I think about that. The big movement in churches today are church planters. And church planters, boy, they go out and start with nothing out there, and they work hard and just trusting God. But that's when you walk by faith. And God, and one thing we're looking forward to doing in the next year or two is starting a church plant. We don't want to be so inwardly focused here. We want to help a church start and begin somewhere, because that's how churches begin. So, but it's tough. And that's sort of what Nehemiah was doing, going all out by leaving his comfort zone. So I just gave you about 3 examples. Nehemiah, myself as an accountant or church planter. But every one of you have a comfort zone. And there's times when God wants you to step out of that comfort zone. And you know what happens when you step out of your comfort zone? You get uncomfortable. That's a brilliant statement right there. That's a brilliant statement right there, okay? So all right. So you'll remember that one, okay? When Nehemiah got to Jerusalem, the first thing he did was to assess the condition of the walls. Now, this is a great leader right here. He did not tell anybody anything he was doing. He simply wanted to see for himself the condition of the city. I want to say it was 3 days, he says. He just walked around and around and around. I'm sure he's taking notes, looking around, trying to assess the situation. Probably said, let me get back to Persia. What am I getting into here? That's what I did about a month after I came to Bellevue Heights. Let me come back. No. Sometimes you look at a situation and say, man, this is worse than I thought. This is going to be a bigger job than I thought. And so he looked around. But then I want to read what he says in chapter 2, verses 17 and 18. Then he said to the people, you see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer suffer derision. And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. Wouldn't that be exciting to be there? You're pouring your heart out to the people, and they said, let us rise up and build. They hadn't risen up and built anything in years and years. And Nehemiah comes, he rallies the troops. He's a great leader. He's got them on the same page. He's got them motivated. He told them how bad the situation was, and it was time to rebuild the wall. And they all got excited. Turn the page. Although the people were excited and ready to go to work, how did the neighboring kings respond to Nehemiah's plan in Nehemiah 2, 19 and 20? But when Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite servant, and Geshem, the Arab, heard of it, they jeered at us and despised us and said, "What is this thing you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king?" Then I replied to them, "The God of heaven will make us prosper, and we his servants will arise and build. But you have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem." So they mocked him and they despised him. You know what they did? They even accused him of rebelling against the king. Be careful what you're doing, Nehemiah. You're stirring up trouble here. They've been getting along just fine without you. Now you come down here from the big city and you put these fancy ideas in their heads. You're just going to get them killed. You're just going to start a war. You're going to make things worse for them. Why don't you go back to your fancy castle back in Susa? Why don't you go back there and leave us alone? Can you see how they were trying? You see, these neighboring kings were ruling. They had the power and the control over the people. And they knew if they rebuilt the temple, if they rebuilt the wall, then the Israelites, the hand of God was with them, and they would be great and mighty and powerful, and they didn't want it to happen. So the first thing they did, they start the smear campaign. You ever had that happen before? The smear campaign, thinking surely that'll stop the work on the wall. When Nehemiah chapter 3 shows the strategic planning and organization of Nehemiah. All the citizens of Jerusalem shared in the work. With the authority of King Artaxerxes and the support of the people, Nehemiah became the leader of Jerusalem and united them with a purpose. He organized the rebuilding of the wall by assigning a portion of the wall to each family. Nehemiah demonstrated excellent leadership skills and tremendous faith in God. Many of their neighbors opposed the Jews and ridiculed them as they worked. Read Nehemiah 4, 1 through 5 and list two people who opposed them. The first thing he did, it's a masterpiece. If you read chapters 3 and 4, he didn't say, all right, we're going to start on the south end and work our way all the way around to the north. You know what he did? He said, the Jones family, you take this quarter of a mile. The Smith family, you take this quarter of the mile. The Thompsons, you take over here. And so they divided it around. Everybody's going to do your part. You're responsible for this, and you're responsible for that, and you're responsible for that. And I'm here to give you the support you need. But each of you are responsible for your own area. And it could be that this is the area where they lived, or they did that. So they had pride in there, and they were taking it personal. My wall is going to be good. My portion is going to be done well. It was just a brilliant sign of leadership right there. But let me read what happened in chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. Now, when Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged, and he jeered at the Jews. And he said in the presence of his brothers and of army of Samaria, "What are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore it for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burned ones at that?" Tobiah the Ammonite was beside himself and said, "Yes, what they are building, if a fox goes up on it, it will break down their stone wall. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn back their taunt on their own heads and give them up to be plundered in the land where they are captives. Do not cover their guilt. Do not let their sin be blotted out of your sight, for they have provoked you to anger in the presence of the builders." So two people stand out. Sanballat, he was the governor of Samaria. So Samaria was that area just north of Jerusalem between Judah and Israel. Sanballat, he was the enemy. And then Tobiah was the leader of the Ammonites. Tobiah was the leader of the Ammonites. And they knew that they couldn't afford for the Jews to be back. And so their only hope was to stop the wall from being built. And that's very important, right? As you see it right there. So the enemies of Nehemiah tried different ways to stop them from rebuilding the wall. First, they instilled fear in the workers. You go after the working force. If they could get the workers to stop following Nehemiah, they would be successful, okay? They threatened to attack the workers. If you go to work tomorrow, we're going to attack you, trying to get them to rebel against Nehemiah and not go to work. They even wrote letters to King Artaxerxes saying, hey, this guy, Nehemiah, whom you sent up here, he's rebelling against you. He's trying to build his own kingdom so he can revolt against you. And so it was so important that Nehemiah was trusted by the king, because they sent letters falsely accusing Nehemiah of leading a coup and a rebellion right there. When all of these failed, they're like 3 strikes already, they asked Nehemiah to come meet with them. But Nehemiah knew their intent was to harm them. So how did Nehemiah reply to their request in chapter 6? So when nothing else worked, the 3 leaders said, Nehemiah, we're all the governors. We got a governing council of the area. We want you to come out. We want to talk to you. Come meet us so we can talk to you about this. And how did Nehemiah respond in chapter 6, verses 1 through 4? Now when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab and the rest of our enemies heard that I had built the wall and that there was no breach left in it, although up to that time I had not set the doors and the gates, Sanballat and Geshem sent to me saying, come, let us meet together at Hakkephirim in the plain of Ono. But they intended to do me harm. And I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? And they sent to me 4 times in this way, and I answered them in the same way manner. In the same way, he goes up. Basically, what he said right there. Where am I? Nehemiah, they said, come meet with us. And Nehemiah said, hey, I'm not going to spend my time meeting with you. I'm doing a great work. I'm doing God's work here. What is it going to profit me to take time off of my work and let the work halt while I leave the city and leave the wall and go sit down and have coffee with you guys? And so he said, no, I need to stay with my troops. I need to stay with my people. We're encouraged. We're moving forward, because he knew their motive was to get them away. And sometimes, let's see if I wrote this down somewhere. Two. We need to realize that when we're doing something of importance, there will be obstacles, and we have to be determined not to let the obstacles prevent us from our goal, okay? In fact, I stopped here in my study, and I went through Nehemiah, and I found about 7 different ways his enemies opposed him. In chapter 2:19, they mocked him. In chapter 4, they mocked him and jeered him again. Chapter 4, 1 through 3. In 4, 7 through 23, they threatened a military attack on the workers. Okay. In chapter 6, 1 through 4, they attempted to draw him away from the wall to come meet with them. In verses 5 through 9, they made false allegations against Nehemiah to the workers, to his subservience. In chapter 6, verses 10 through 14, they paid people to discredit Nehemiah. They paid people to say bad things about Nehemiah. In chapter 6, verses 17 to 19, they sent spies in Jerusalem to report back to them what was happening. You see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different ways Nehemiah is doing a good work. You ever feel like you're doing a good work? God, why is it so hard? I'll tell you why it's so hard. The devil's trying to stop you. The evil one's trying to stop you. And I'm going to say in my sermon Sunday, in fact, my opening lines is this. When I talk about culture and I talk about Bible, and so the enemy's not the culture. The enemy's not that person who believes differently than you. The enemy is not the Republicans or the Democrats or the government or the Hollywood or people like that. No. The enemy is, our battle is not against flesh and blood. Our battle is a spiritual battle. Now, the devil, he works through people because he knows the best thing he can do is get Billy Bob against Bubba, Sally Sue against Jane over here. And he turns people to do that. And that's what was happening here. But Nehemiah would have none of it. He said, I don't have time to do this. I'm was focused on the word of God. And then you read down, that's all in chapter 6. And because Nehemiah stayed firm to the task, look at verses 15 and 16 of chapter 6. So the wall was finished on 25th day of the month of Elul in 52 days. And when all our enemies heard of it, all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly into their own esteem because they knew that God was with them. Isn't that a powerful story? 52 days. Randy, are you back there? We're going to finish our office in 52 days. Okay. 52 days is my limit right there. Put your clocks about right now. All right. Randy gave me an evil look. Okay. So, but that's leadership right there. That's leadership right there, okay? All right, go over to the next. It says, the next part is chapters 8 through 13. This part of Nehemiah is led by Ezra. Ezra was the priest. After the wall was rebuilt, Ezra returned to Jerusalem to assist Nehemiah in dedicating the walls and sanctifying the people. Nehemiah and Ezra were completely different, but God used them both to lead the nation. Ezra stood upon a pulpit of wood and read the law to the people in Nehemiah 8, verses 1 through 12. The reading of God's word sparked a revival. What feast was instituted according to Nehemiah 8, 13 through 18? What he did, he told them about the Feast of the Booths. He reminded them of that time when they lived in the wilderness, they lived in tents or booths. So that is a feast that they go out for 7 days every year and live in tents and lean-tos and booths to remember how God had provided for them. They had forgotten all these things. They had forgotten the sacrifice. They had forgotten the feast and the festivals right there. Turn to the top of page 79. How did the people respond to the words of Ezra according to Nehemiah 9, 1, 2, and 3? Now, on the 24th day of this month, the people of Israel were assembled with fasting and in sackcloth and with earth on their heads. I'll let somebody tell me that later, okay? And the Israelites separated themselves from all foreigners and stood and confessed their sins and the iniquities of their fathers. And they stood up in the place and read from the book of the law of the Lord their God for a quarter of the day, and for another quarter of it they made confession and worshiped the Lord their God. And so the question is, how did the people respond to the words of Ezra according to Nehemiah? They confessed their sins, and they fasted, and they prayed, and they separated themselves from foreigners, okay? They confessed their sins, fasted, and they prayed, and they separated themselves from foreigners, and they worshiped the Lord their God. Now, let me stop here for a second. And someone asked me a question last week about, it appears that God told them, even those Israelites who had intermarried with these pagan nations lawfully, to separate from them. And now, is that a contradiction? Because other places, we know God hates divorce. God hates divorce. And even today in the New Testament, if you're not to be married to someone who is not a believer, unequally yoked, but if you are lawfully married, that's not a grounds for divorce. You are to stay married, honor your relationship with them. But for some reason here, he told them to separate from them. And the only thing I can see, I'll have to do more study on this, but the biggest command and the biggest sin of the Israelites when they entered the promised land, the biggest command was separate yourselves from the people. You're a holy people. You're a chosen people. You're not to intermingle with it. They were supposed to drive them all completely out. I think God knew that because God didn't want their influence on them. But because they didn't drive them out and they intermarried with them, they accepted their gods and their pagan lifestyles and worshiped their idols like that. And I think even after Zerubbabel went back and rebuilt the temple, they were to separate themselves, and they didn't. They were intermarried, and that was the sin. The biggest sin, as you look in the books of Ezra, was the intermarrying with pagan cultures and worshiping their false gods. And so my thought is, he said, we've got to be separate. We've got to be separate. You got to be distinct from the cultures of the world. So they separated themselves right there. The Levites and served as priests. Let me see if that's everything I want to say there. Okay, the Levites served as the priest, and they began instituting reforms to call the people back to God. In chapter 9, they recount the entire history of Israel and how God had protected them and provided for them and promised them this great land. They confessed that they were disobedient and had rebelled and were suffering the consequences of their sin. Another prayer. See the prayers? They confess that, God, you're great, you're mighty, you gave us this. We failed you, we disobeyed you, and now we want to come back. We're repenting and we're coming back to you. And then the end result was they were making a new covenant with God to obey God and follow his commands. This covenant was signed by the leaders and the priests of Israel. Okay, so that's when they said, we're starting from scratch. We want a new relationship with you. So Nehemiah he came to lead, but now he becomes the governor of Israel, of Jerusalem. And he begins to establish policies for the city to operate. We see yet again here his organization, his leadership, and his vision for Jerusalem. With the help of Ezra, they organized the priests and established procedures for the temple. They placed a strong emphasis on restoring the Sabbath, not intermarrying with foreigners, here we go again, and honoring God with the tithe. Read Nehemiah 13, 4 through 31, and list some of the areas of reforms that took place. So I'm going to go over these right real quick because we're going to run out of time. But Nehemiah, he came, he rebuilt the wall, he became the governor. But then we do know, if you read, he left and went back to the palace for a time. And while he was there, that's when things started to go awry again. Because there was one priest named Eliashib, who was the high priest in charge of the temple. And did you know he was, you've heard me, the two enemies, Sanballat and Tobiah? Okay, somehow by marriage he was related to Tobiah. And he allowed Tobiah either to live in the holy place or to take up residence there or to use it. He took out the grain offerings and all the things out of this place of the temple and just made treaties with the guy who was the biggest enemy of Nehemiah and to come into the holy of holy place and you take up this residence right there. Now, when word got to Nehemiah about this, he was not a happy camper. So he came back and he and Ezra said, we're going to clean this place up. And so in chapter 13, you see some of the things that he did. Chapter 13, let me read beginning in verse 4. Now before he came back, Eliashib the priest, who was appointed over the chambers of the house of God and who was related to Tobiah, prepared for Tobiah a large chamber where they had previously put the grain offering, the frankincense, the vessels, and the tithes of grain, wine, and oil, which were given by commandment to the Levites, singers, and gatekeepers in contribution for the priests. While this was taking place, I was not in Jerusalem. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I went to the king. And after some time I asked leave of the king and came to Jerusalem, and there I discovered the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah, preparing for him a chamber in the courts of the house of God. And I was very angry, and I threw all the household furniture of Tobiah out of the chamber. Then I gave orders, and they cleansed out the chambers, and I brought back there the vessels of the house of God with the grain offering. So he came and cleaned house. He just cleaned house. Get him out of here. He was never for us, and now you brought him into our very midst. So the first thing they did, they cleaned out the temple in verses 4 through 9. In verses 10 through 14, they restored the tithe. The tithe. In verses 15 through 22, they restored the observance of the Sabbath. And in verses 23 through 30, he once again denounced mixed marriages. So the biggest reforms, number one, he cleansed the temple. This is a holy place. This is a holy place. We're going to be there. Number two, he restored the tithe. We're going to honor God by giving him the first fruits of the tithe. Number three, he restored the Sabbath. We're going to remember the Sabbath, and we're going to keep it holy. And number four, he denounced mixed marriages. No more intermarrying. We're going to marry. We're going to be equally yoked with the Jews. And that's all in chapter 13. Okay? So the achievements and faith of Ezra and Nehemiah can hardly be overemphasized. Without Ezra's teaching and Nehemiah's leadership, the Jewish people probably would not have survived. At the close of the book of Nehemiah, the Jews are in their own land, but still under Persian rule. No further record of the Jews is found in the Bible until the birth of Christ in the New Testament. So one time I did a leadership seminar for the AT&T company in the city where I live, and I used this and the book of Nehemiah to talk about leadership. And I just, 10 characteristics of a leader. Number one, Nehemiah responded to the call of God. This is just not on your notes. I'm going to put this on the back. In chapter 2, Nehemiah responded to the call of God. There comes a time when you may not be expecting it, but God impresses on your heart, he wants you to do something. It may be to take a job. It may be to get married. It may be to adopt a child. It may be to take a volunteer position or to take on a task. But when God places it on your heart, you got to respond. He doesn't force. So Nehemiah responded. He left. He responded to the call of God. And then he left his comfort zone and followed God. Number two, Nehemiah cared for the people, and it showed. He cared for the people. He won the hearts of the people. He was the leader that people would follow him because they saw Nehemiah was willing to work. Nehemiah walked the walls. He was with them. He wasn't just coming as a big fancy leader. He was with them all the way. He cared. A leader needs to care for his people. You've heard the phrase, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Okay. Number three, Nehemiah assessed the situation before beginning. And I could learn from this, my wife says. I just jump into task and go, 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 go. And about 3 weeks later, I think I should have tackled this a different way. And why read the directions? I can go right at it. He just walked around. He assessed the situation before he ever began. And he made a plan. He made a plan. Number 4, Nehemiah had a vision from God. Nehemiah could honestly say, this is not my vision, this is God's vision. I'm not here for Nehemiah, I'm here for God. He knew his vision. Friends, that gives you power. That gives you courage. I know, because I'm much more bold as a leader when I know I'm standing with God. When I know that, when I truly believe that this is God's vision for Bellevue Heights, or God's vision for this, and Nehemiah knew this was God's vision, so he was much more bold and confident. He had a vision. For number 5, Nehemiah bathed the project in prayer. Nehemiah bathed the project. I love it when secular business leaders still pray. At our men's group, do you remember who was here when the guy from Ping Golf was here a couple weeks ago? He was this is the man, the son of the man who invented Ping Golf, and he came and talked about they still pray at their office. They pray in their office. Anybody, it doesn't matter if they're, I don't know if they hire non-Christians, but they pray. They bathe everything in prayer because that's what their father did. And I know many Christian leaders who bathe projects in prayer. Number 6. Nehemiah implemented his vision and plan. That's a biggie. People don't realize this. A lot of people are dreamers, but they don't know how to implement it. A lot of people live way up here in the clouds, but they don't know how to put the rubber to the road. You know what I'm saying right there? And so in Nehemiah, he knew how to implement his vision and his plan. Number 6, Nehemiah built a team. And that's, you remember he had the Jones, the Smiths, the Thompsons. He had a team of leaders all doing their part. You talked to Jim Harbaugh when he won the national championship last night. He was first to thank him for his family and for his coaches and all the teams he had there. No man is an island. It doesn't happen by themselves. You surround yourself with a team, That's number 7. Number 8, Nehemiah keeps the people focused on the goal. That's so important. It's staying focused on your goal. Because, friends, it's hard. I used to tell people when I was a youth minister, if you're walking down the hallway at your high school and you see the goal at the end and you got classrooms all the way, everywhere you walk in life, there's someone that comes, come on over here, come party with us, come try this, come do this. It's hard to stay focused on the goal. It's hard to stay focused. We're going there, and my wife, she loves dessert. And it's hard for her to say no to cheesecake, or her to say no to a concrete from Culver's or Freddy's like that. That doesn't bother me at all. But you give me free food at a buffet, it's hard to walk past that donut line, coming up right there, And so it's hard to stay focused on the goal. We need to stay focused. And number 9, Nehemiah would not be discouraged by opposition. He knew and expected opposition. He wasn't saying, oh, dear God, why are you doing this to me? Do you ever say that? Why is this happening to me? He woke up every morning, I think to God, I know it's coming. When it's coming, I'm going to be ready. I'm expecting it because we're doing a great work. He expected it, and he was not going to let it keep him or prevent him from his goal. And so, number 10, when he was finished, he waited for another vision from God. I love that. Accomplish the task. What's next, God? What's next? What a way to go through life. Dear God, I thank you for Nehemiah and his vision and his faithfulness to you. I pray, dear God, that we can be people of vision here at Bellevue Heights, listening to you and praying to you to see what you have for us. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. Great day.